Yes. Welcome back to the PMC podcast. And I'm joined by another very special guest, Calum Raistrick. How are we doing, mate? You all right?
All good, thanks, bud. Thanks for having me on.
Mate, you're more than welcome. Thank you for coming on. And for anyone who doesn't know, I'm pretty sure everyone will know who you are, but you're right to just give us a quick introduction on who you are and how you've got to where you are within fitness industry today.
Yeah, so I am 1/5 of the Muscle Mentors. Obviously, me and Luke kind of co-founded it, and then we've built that team up over the last couple of years. I actually PT'd for a couple of years in the same gym that Pat PT's at now, so we've got some history from back in Tunbridge Wells, and then a lot of people will know me from my time at M10, and then obviously we moved from M10 to more of an online basis. So that's kind of how the last few years have looked.
Amazing. So I brought you on today, mate, because I wanted to just talk about what sort of key things and factors people should be focusing on, or actually like general population individuals should be focusing on when looking to gain muscle tissue. When we just break this down into sort of like a nutritional standpoint, a training standpoint, and a lifestyle standpoint. From a nutritional standpoint, what sort of key things should an individual be focusing on when they actually are looking to gain as much muscle tissue as possible?
I think the important kind of clarification to ground at the start will be like the level that client's at and meeting them at their needs. Because for what I consider to be kind of the fundamentals when it comes to nutrition for the client base that I'll work with wouldn't necessarily reflect in the same manner with someone that was like largely coaching general population clients, because their direct needs and their focuses need to be at a much more kind of understanding level to where they're coming to you at. So where it could be the likes of, from a general basis, understanding energy balance, understanding the caloric value of the foods they're eating and what they need on a day-to-day basis and why that's important. How to track, how to manage nutrition from that front. And then, potentially going from beyond calories and protein to how are we going to partition this calorie amount into protein, carbs, and fats, and why would we do that, and what are the implications of all of those individual macronutrients. But you can get into the depths of nutrient timing and how we're going to be cyclical with our approach to nutrition, but ultimately, just as we all know, it's energy balance as a whole. It's just the intricacies in which we're going to be going down that rabbit hole with will depend on the client's needs, and whether that client is someone that's looking to turn to turn pro as a physique athlete or a bodybuilder. They're looking at that 1% win, and they're looking at, let's look at the timing of your meals now. Let's look at the micronutrient composition of your meals. Let's look at every single ounce of detail we can be specific about. Let's look at your electrolyte intake. Let's look at sodium and potassium. All the things that we can be kind of micromanaging at the same time, and all those 1% add up to potentially a bigger win or a better overall performance on the day. Whereas if it is a general population client and we go in at that level, we're just going to baffle them and overwhelm them with information they don't need to know yet or potentially ever. So I think when we spoke about this before we started the podcast, in terms of, potentially the client base that your demographic right now, Pat, you work with and you're getting results with, will be a different approach to what I work with my clients. We're ultimately achieving the same thing. We're improving body composition. It's just at a different scale in terms of what they're looking to achieve. But ultimately, we're getting there in the same way. It's just we're presenting that in a different way, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, 100%. And it really comes down to just like understanding the actual key principles of energy balance, and understanding that like we're going to be in a far more superior place when we're in a calorie surplus to looking to gain muscle tissue, but also like protein content. If we nail those two sort of foundations, it's realistically like those other 1% things can make a difference. But from a general population standpoint, if they haven't really got much time to focus on all these sort of things and can't optimize nutrient timing and stuff like that, they just need to sort of understand the basics, which is really, really important. When it comes to a training standpoint, is there anything, I know this is very much like individual dependent, it's going to factor on there's loads of factors we need to take into consideration when obviously like look at someone's training programming and training style. But is there any sort of key things you would focus on within like a general population? Someone's will listen to this and they're looking to gain muscle tissue, they're a bit unsure about their training at the moment. Is there anything we'd like straight off the bat just be like, okay, cool, this is something I would look to focus on?
In terms of training?
In terms of training, yeah.
Yeah, again, it depends on their experience level and what they've been doing in the past. But I think as a general rule of thumb, for people that are new to this, they significantly underestimate the amount of workload they need to do to actually achieve the level of stimulus they'll need to progress, especially when training is new to them. And there'll be two main schools of thought there. There'll be the amount of work they need to do that you see clients typically overshoot all the time. But then that overshooting of the workload also comes from the fact that when they're new to training, their ability to train effectively and their ability to execute is generally poor. So they'll feel like they need more of that stimulus to achieve the same amount of work on that tissue, because they're generally not very good at training in the first place. So the goal for us should be to improve exercise quality first and use the minimal amount of quantity they need to achieve a given task. And for a lot of initial trainees, they're not going to respond well to a lower volume approach because they can't generate the level of intensity needed, whether that's load or whether that's the ability to generate intramuscular tension. They can't generate that level of intensity needed to benefit in value from a very low volume approach. They need more to accrue like an effective amount of volume to adapt. So, for a lot of clients that will be new to this, we're like, right, let's lay down and optimize how we're training in the first place. And let's look at how much volume you realistically need or / can recover from to progress. And then over time, the likely trend you'll see is as intensity starts to rise and their ability to train effectively starts to rise, there'll be an inverse relationship between intensity and the amount of workload they need to progress. Because obviously as intensity rises and their ability to train effectively rises as well, like the implications on recovery then rise, and therefore means that they need less workload and they can actually get away with less workload to progress at the same rate. So I think the biggest thing you'll see is like you'll see this on the gym floor as well. Like it's easier to see this as a PT than it is an online coach, unless we're looking at video analysis and we're getting them to send photos in and videos in of training, where that's a massive component of this in the first place. How are they executing movements? The speed at which they are, moving through movement patterns, concentric and eccentric control. Are they able to actually generate proper intramuscular tension and feel that tissue from A to B instead of just moving a load mindlessly and subconsciously from A to B? And then start to build on it from there. And yes, you can get into the intricacies of like exercise selection needs to be relative to them, and regardless of how minimal their ability to take training at home, for example, at the moment, like equipment is absolutely minimal. So we have to strip that back to the bare basics, but like the same principles apply. It's like, just get very, very good at training as a skill in the first place. And then we can apply that to anything. We can apply it to a bodyweight squat. We can apply it to a press up. And then we just start to progress from there. Like when me and Luke did that podcast with Strom, Rich over at Strom a couple of weeks ago, we spoke about like, the amount of volume or the amount of workload that an initial trainee would need to elicit a stimulus is going to be pretty minuscule when they've learned how to train. And then we're looking at that from a longevity perspective over an entire training career. If we start here and we can benefit from progressing over here, then as we start to advance forwards, we can always then add in small increments in volume or intensity, or just doing different things within our training parameters to keep progressing and slowly just creeping that up over time, just like we're progressively overloading the movement pattern. But a lot of initial trainers will go in thinking they need loads, or taking the inspiration from their favorite people on social media and looking at what Jordan does or what their favorite pro bodybuilder does and trying to apply it to them when it has no applicability whatsoever to their current situation and their needs. I think that like Instagram and social media as a topic there is fantastic from the perspective of being a source of inspiration for people and being a motivator to people, but it also does blind people in terms of what they actually need for their individual needs and requirements, as opposed to trying to basically copy someone else's format and apply it to themselves, thinking they're going to get the same results, where like this is trying to fit like a circle in a triangle. Like it's not going to work. We need to find a triangle to fit within a triangle for this to work, if that makes sense.
No, that's really important, especially like when we look at, that's like the first thing I always do when I take on a client is always first of all look at execution of movements. Are they actually like contracting the muscle they want to contract? And it's like for a lot of the time you do a movement with a general population client and they don't actually feel it within the muscle they're training, and it's sort of stripping back and going, okay, cool, are you feeling it within this given muscle group? Then we look at tempo. Are we controlling the muscle? Are we like creating as much tension within that given muscle? And then we start progressing intensity from there. And it's really important we understand that. And I think I was chatting to Ryan about this on the first podcast I did. We were talking about home training and how we need to try create as much like contraction and tension within a given muscle group while we're doing this like home training exercises, because we don't have the adequate stimulus to the adequate like weight or load to use. We have to try create as much tension as we can within that muscle. And I think that carrier effect from what we've learned within home training and creating that tension within a muscle and that mind muscle connection going into the gym and actually utilizing that, still like thinking about creating as much tension within the muscle and applying it once we've got load is going to be really beneficial for individuals.
100%. I think that's a very good point. And I think one of the reasons why that will happen is because when we're in that home training environment that people have been in for the last 8 to 10 weeks, in my opinion, as a coach, especially working with Gen Pop clients, like the last 10 weeks or so of people being in quarantine and lockdown is probably the best situation to take a client on board in a coaching process, because they're not distracted by what other people are doing in the gym. They're not distracted and overwhelmed by that gym environment and feeling like they need to stack the machine or feeling like they need to progress quicker than they need to, or feeling like they need to copy that individual over there. They're in a position where it's like we can get super good and really, really effective at the most simple of movement patterns and just learning how to contract tissue and control these movements, like a push-up and a split squat or a bodyweight squat, whatever it might be. And they're kind of building those foundations from scratch. And then you can use that first 10 weeks to then advance into a proper training scenario where we have now a leg press, a leg extension, a hack squat. And now they've learned how to control and generate intramuscular tension. They can apply it to those machines. Whereas I think a lot of people, you'll find the situation where you take a client on board who's already been training for a couple of years, who already has kind of set their own habits that are potentially suboptimal. It's then trying to pull them away from those habits that they formed already and reshape that into something that's more effective. And there can be a lot of resilience there for a lot of clients initially, but it's about kind of reiteration and explaining the concept that you're trying to deliver to them, and then showing them how that actually feels and how it works and how it should look. And then they start to cotton onto it, because you'll have coached clients in the past, Pat, I'm sure, and now where you'll take someone on like potentially a younger guy who's been training for a bit of time himself, who's kind of set in his ways and set in his patterns, and you'll try and deliver kind of a more optimal way of approaching things, and they'll do it in a PT session, and then you'll catch a glimpse of them training on their own, and they're back into their old habits again straight away. And it takes time to actually start to develop that stuff long term, right?
No, 100%. You teach them all these things, and suddenly you see them do like 4 sets of flies, just like really fast, and just trying to get. Like, so what did I teach you? But
exactly. Yeah.
So we've covered sort of the nutritional aspect, the training aspect. From like a lifestyle aspect, what sort of things are there? Any things that people should like try optimize within the lifestyle when they're looking to gain muscle tissue from like a recovery standpoint? Like obviously me and Luke, I did a podcast yesterday with Luke, and we chatted a lot about sleep, and we know that sleep has a beneficial effect with regards to muscle tissue. But is there anything from this a lifestyle point of view?
I think the biggest thing, and Luke will have gone to town on this in terms of depth, but the sleep and recovery, and just having an ability to be aware of feedback markers related to recovery and fatigue, and building an awareness over biofeedback. So when we're looking at like a tracking form for clients, and especially for a general population client, we can go into as much detail as we want and overwhelm them with HRV, resting heart rate, blood pressure, all these different markers that potentially an individual like that shouldn't be presented with and exposed to in the initial start of the coaching process, because they don't need to. They just need to start to gain an awareness of how they feel and how they should feel, how they should sleep, building habits, building lifestyle practices, developing a morning and evening routine, all the basics. And by default, if we do all that stuff, then all those markers that we're not tracking yet are going to improve by default anyway, because we're getting all the foundational stuff in place. So I think one thing that I hold my hand up a couple of years ago when I was starting to learn this stuff, and when I was back at M10, I was dealing with more Gen Pop clients, is I was trying to force this stuff into individuals that didn't really need that level of detail, but because I was so passionate about it, and it's what I was learning about, I was trying to apply it with the people I was working with, but it was far too early for them to actually take that on board. And it did overwhelm a lot of people. There'll be some people that took it on board and we thrive with that, but it overwhelmed a lot of people that were at that foundational level that I wanted to kind of fit this system that I thought was optimal into that client. And I think it takes a very skilled coach to view a client with a blank canvas and give them what they need and when they need it, as opposed to being a little bit more dogmatic with your approach and having one set method and trying to apply that to everyone. If you can be a versatile coach and deliver a coaching experience which is relative to their needs and their level, that's the biggest thing in my opinion. For general pop clients, is getting them to be aware of their recovery, getting them to be aware of how they should be feeling on a daily basis, how they should be sleeping, how they should be waking up, how they should feel when they wake up, sleep quality, the amount of times they wake up at night. It's little things like that that we don't need to track. We can just literally write in a journal. And at the end of the week, we can ask them and be like, right, how was this? And then we can start to build awareness there.
Massively. When we look at, I know again, this is going to be very individual dependent, but is there a set amount of body weight we should be looking at to increase on like a week to week / month to month basis when we're looking to increase muscle tissue, or is it very much individual dependent on like visuals as well, looking at other aspects of progression, or is there like a set amount of body weight we can be looking at?
It's going to depend on it's very individualistic with regards to like protein accretion and one's ability to increase body mass. When we look at body composition, obviously we've got fat mass, lean mass, or muscle tissue and fluid. When one starts to drive their body weight up excessively, and that body weight starts to climb very rapidly, we're going to generally, for most populations, all populations, even whether that individual is taking performance enhancing drugs or anabolics, which are creating a super physiological environment of hormones, which will aid protein accretion in the first place, will be based on the hormonal environment they're in, will be based on stress, and will be based on the practices they have in place on a daily basis to actually hold themselves accountable to training, to recovery, to nutrition. The individualistic rate at which one should gain should be based on feedback on a weekly basis, how they're recovering, how they're responding, the state of their nervous system, how they're performing in training, how food is being digested, their ability to partition nutrients and how overall GI function is. And then start to look at a massive component is just what's happening visually, like what's happening with whether we're measuring calipers, whether we're just looking at body fat distribution patterns on photos, what's happening visually as their body weight goes up. And for general population clients, that process will be extremely slow. If we're looking at gaining lean tissue, we can gain body fat super quickly by force feeding and just putting them in a massive surplus. But is it weight that they're going to benefit from? Probably not. And you'll see this with like clients that you'll see that have, you've got a gen pop client that their coach will then get them to enter a massive caloric surplus and quote unquote bulk for say 6-8 months, whatever. And we've got a load of fluid going on. We've got a load of body fat, and then we've got a small amount of lean tissue. And then when they enter a dieting phase and they get rid of that inflammation and systemic stress, they get rid of that fluid and they get rid of that body fat, they might have gained 3 or 4 pounds of lean tissue in that 8 months. It's like, well, was that necessary to put the body through that amount of stress to gain 40 pounds to then only get 6 or 7 pounds out of that 40 pounds? It probably is even less than that, like 3 or 4 pounds. Probably not. They could have actually approached that in a more patient manner and not gain the fluid and the body fat, and just approach that in a slightly more patient, long-term manner. So for unassisted clients, in my opinion, that gaining process needs to be slower and lower, or slower and longer in terms of the gradual approach needed from a caloric perspective and a body weight perspective. If somebody is assisted, and a lot of the individuals that I work with are assisted, yes, the rate in which they can accrue muscle mass will be quicker, but the same principle still applies. Like if we're driving up your body weight 3 or 4 pounds a week, that is not going to be muscle. That is just weight you're gaining that, yes, you'll feel big from, and yes, you'll see the scales reflect that, but it's not going to be beneficial body weight. And the quicker that rate of gain is, the more compromised your health becomes, because then your blood pressure will increase, your resting heart rate will increase, and then we're starting to get more of a strain on the heart, on the kidneys, all these things that are going to be perishable in terms of their ability to handle what you're doing. So it's very individualistic in terms of the rate, but it also means that I think the take home is when we're looking to do this optimally and keep health as a consideration in terms of optimizing health, that slower and more gradual approach will win hands down 10 out of 10 times, because it's the only way we can control everything going on. Like, you can be as aggressive as you want, but ultimately aggression leads to more implications on health. And if you're more aggressive with your body weight and you drive your body weight up excessively, like, a lot of that and most of it will still just have to come off when you want to bring them back down the other side.
Yeah, 100%. So from like a tracking, like, progression standpoint, obviously we look at scale weight on like a weekly average basis, just to make sure that it is slowly sort of creeping up. The most important thing within a gaining phase is going to be looking at visuals and making sure that, like, you are visually looking better over an extended period of time, but also looking at like health markers as well, like resting heart rate and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's probably worth considering as well when we look at body composition and the things that are occupying body composition. Like, somebody's body weight doesn't need to change significantly or in certain periods at all for them to actually be increasing lean mass. And therefore we look at, right, what's happening with performance and training as well. Are they recovering, and are they able to progress training or whatever format you have within training? If they are able to progress training, like, just don't obsess too much about their body weight. Obsess more about what's happening with their visuals,
Yeah.
and what's happening with performance. Because as soon as you start obsessing about body weight, you're going to be emotionally attached to that number, and you're going to start to have that heavily influence your decision making, where you would, or you wouldn't have potentially added food if you didn't look at body weight. You would have been happy, but because you've seen they haven't gained any weight, it's like, right, I need to add more calories because their weight staying the same, but their photos might look leaner or better or fuller or whatever it might be, and their training's progressed. But if those two boxes are ticked, then let's leave them.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
That's really important, and that's something that I'm terrible, and you've known me for a long time. I'm terrible at going into like gaining phases, because I don't want to lose condition. As soon as I feel like I'm losing condition, I'm like, okay, well, I need to do a mini cut, I need to diet back down again. I think that's something a lot of general population do struggle with, is the fact that, like, trying to push body weight up or trying to gain muscle tissue is trying to just stay motivated within it. And that's something that's, like you touched on then, is so important, making sure that we are putting the focus within the training and actually looking to progress, and making that like the most important factor within the gaining phase is actually looking to progress on a week-to-week basis, looking to get stronger within movements. And then it's really important to say.
100%, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so so obviously we just touched on for people who are unassisted, would you, like you said, would you sort of make it, I want to say lean bulk, but obviously we don't want to hold on to condition as much as possible within this. We can sort of let it slip a bit, isn't it? Like, we are going to gain a bit of body fat within a gaining phase over like an extended period of time, but it's just not gaining too much, isn't it? But obviously a lot of people always try to do like a lean bulk and trying to stay as much in condition as possible. But do you think we can lose a little bit of condition within this like journey?
The easiest way of looking at quantifying that is, if somebody is obsessed about staying lean, I guarantee you, if you look at their performance markers and their training over an extended period of time, that will not reflect what it should look like if they're obsessed with staying lean and they haven't increased their food. Because if they're successfully and accurately tracking performance from a training perspective, their performance won't be improving if they're still staying at that initial set point they had at the end of a diet. So as long as we can get that performance starting to move forwards, that means that nutrition and energy balance will have to change for that to happen. And that means that individual is then going to start progressing. Whereas people that are obsessed with, being lean post diet, and they just stay in limbo the whole time, they're going to be under recovered. They're going to be chronically under recovered and probably very, very fatigued for a long period of time. And they're not going to be progressing the strength at the rate they should do. They shouldn't. They should be seeing some like tangible linear progress when it comes to performance. And it's probably not going to be there if you're obsessed with having beach ready abs year round. There'll always be genetic outliers to that rule, and there'll always be freaks that will stay in shape year round and that will be able to grow. But there will be some level of tolerance, and there has to be some level of tolerance with gaining some body fat and gaining some fluid in the name of increasing lean mass over time. It's just the rate at which you allow that to happen is very individualistic. What they can tolerate themselves psychologically, and the distance you have between now and the goal to actually get that muscle on them.
Yeah, mate, that's absolutely fantastic. And there's loads and loads of really good points there with regards to general population, like muscle gaining, and it's really, really important. I just wanted to say, Matt, we'll wrap the podcast up here because I know that you are a very busy boy, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on and actually just talking through those points with regards to training, nutrition, lifestyle, and what people should be focusing on with looking at trying to gain as much muscle tissue as possible. It's really, really, really appreciate it. Where's the best place for individuals to find you, mate, if they wanted to know a bit more information about this, or if they want coaching and stuff like that? Where's the best way for them to find you?
Just if you Google the Muscle Mentors or Instagram the Muscle Mentors, you'll see all of our individual tags there, and you'll be able to find me under Calum.
Perfect, mate. Perfect. Thank you very much for coming on today, mate.
My pleasure, man. Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Right, mate. Awesome. Thank you very much for that.
Spot on. That was concise, but we got a lot in there.
Yeah, that's it. That's how I was conscious sometimes. I know you were busy, but that's the thing. Like my job, but like my sort of demographic base, they're the sort of the key things they want to sort of know. And like, don't get me wrong, like we could go into depths within like the training, like what happens within the muscle and like within like all that stuff. But like they don't really.
Is it applicable? Not really.
Like,
no.
That's it. Like all they want to know is like, do they just be in a surplus? How much? Do you know what I mean? It's like all these things, and like the training thing is like really important, and actually understanding execution and stuff like that. And like a load of my clients, like still today, like you go and watch them training, it's like you're still doing stuff wrong. You're like, I've been coaching you for 2 years now, and you're saying they've still got like habits and stuff like that.
Takes time.
Yeah, man, big time.
Takes time.
Big time. But mate, thank you so much.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me on. It's good to catch up.
Yeah, man, really good. And yeah, I hope things go well with you, man. I'll probably speak to you soon.
Just send me a when it's out. Just send me a link, and I'll do one of those swipe up things.
Amazing. Do you reckon actually before you? Do you reckon I get you to send me a photo of yourself, like Luke to send me his Muscle Mentors one?
Yeah, that's fine.
And to like a little infographic, and I'll send you that infographic.
That's cool, man. That's cool.
Amazing. Thank you very much, buddy.
Cheers, dude. We'll speak soon.
Yeah, man. Take care. Bye.
Bye.